The champagne was flowing, the diamonds were blinding, and my sister Sarah was finally in her element. Standing on the grand staircase of the Pierre Hotel, she looked like a queen in her custom-made silk gown, her hand resting possessively on the arm of her fiancé, Julian, the heir to a multi-billion-dollar real estate empire. To the 400 elite guests in the room, Sarah was the golden child of the Sterling family, a philanthropist and a visionary. To me, she was the woman who had spent the last 3 years making sure the world believed. I was a mentally unstable dropout, so she could hoard our family's entire inheritance. The humiliation didn't start with a whisper, it started with a spotlight. Sarah signaled the orchestra to stop and tapped her microphone, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on me, standing in the back near the service entrance. I was wearing a plain, black staff uniform, the only way I could get past the guards she'd hired to keep me away from her perfect night. "Everyone, if I could have your attention," Sarah announced, her voice dripping with fake sugary pity. "I want to take a moment to acknowledge my sister. Elena, she's the one over there by the garbage bins," trying to blend in with the catering staff. A ripple of cruel laughter moved through the crowd. People turned their heads, their expensive lenses focusing on my cheap apron and tired eyes. Sarah sighed dramatically into the microphone. "It breaks my heart that she's fallen so far. After our father died, she spent her half of the money on, well, let's just say bad habits. I offered her a job as a maid at my new estate just to keep her off the streets. But I see she prefers to crash my engagement party instead. She thought she was burying me in front of the city's most powerful people. But she didn't realize that the maid she was mocking was actually the person who had just been sworn in as the lead court stenographer for the highest criminal division in the state." Julian, her fiancé, looked at me with a mixture of disgust and boredom. "Sarah, honey, don't let the help ruin the mood," he whispered, loud enough for the front row to hear. Sarah nodded, a predatory smirk playing on her lips. "You're right, security. Please escort my sister out. And make sure she doesn't take any of the silverware on her way out. We all know how needy she gets when she's broke." 2 large men in suits stepped toward me, grabbing my arms with unnecessary force. Sarah blew me a mocking kiss as she raised her glass for a toast to her, bright and honest future. She was at the top of the world, basking in the glow of a life she had stolen from me through forgery and lies. She thought this was the final chapter of my life, the moment I was erased from society forever. But as they dragged me toward the exit, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I didn't struggle. I didn't scream. I just looked Sarah dead in the eye and smiled. It was a surgical strike smile, the kind you give someone right before the trapdoor opens. I reached into my apron and pulled out a small, encrypted tablet, not a silver fork. "Wait," I said, my voice carrying with a sudden, chilling authority that made the security guards pause. I looked at the crowd of billionaires, judges, and city officials. My sister is right about one thing. There is something needy in this room. But it's not me. It's the justice system, and it's been looking for Sarah for a very long time. I tapped a command on the tablet, and the massive projector screen behind. Sarah, the one that had been showing a montage of her and Julian's fairy tale romance, suddenly flickered to life. It didn't show photos of the beach or the ring. It showed a live, high-definition feed of an empty courtroom, where a judge was currently pounding a gavel. Sarah Sterling, the judge's voice boomed through the ballroom's surround sound system, freezing the golden child in her tracks. "The grand jury has just returned a true bill. You are hereby ordered to appear for an emergency hearing regarding the Sterling estate. Forgery effective immediately." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was a medical shock to the entire room. Sarah's glass shattered on the marble floor. The glow was gone, replaced by the cold blue light of the legal system. I looked at my sister, whose social mask was literally falling apart in front of the cameras. "The party isn't over, Sarah," I whispered, loud enough for the microphone to catch. "It's just moving to the one place where your lies don't have any clout." The story of my supposed downfall began exactly 3 years ago. On the night our father, David Sterling, took his last breath. He was a man who believed in 2 things: the power of the law and the sanctity of a promise. He had spent his life building a real estate empire with the intention of splitting it equally between his 2 daughters. I was the one who followed in his footsteps, spending my nights studying for the bar exam and my days working as his legal researcher. Sarah, however, was the golden child of the social scene, a woman who viewed our father's wealth not as a responsibility, but as a bottomless bank account for her influencer lifestyle. When the mirror paradox finally shattered, it happened in the lawyer's office 48 hours after the funeral. I expected a standard reading of the will, but what I received was a surgical strike on my entire existence. Sarah sat across from me, draped in designer mourning weeds, while the family attorney, a man Sarah had secretly been dating for months, read a document that claimed I had been completely disinherited. According to the new will, our father had discovered I was funneling money into offshore accounts and had decided to leave everything, the properties, the liquid assets, and the family name, to Sarah. I knew it was a lie. I knew the signature on that document was a masterpiece of forgery, but I had no way to prove it. Sarah had played the long game. She had spent the months leading up to our father's death isolated him from me, telling him I was too busy with my elite friends to visit his bedside. She painted me as a greedy opportunist, and the moment he was gone, she used the forged will to freeze my bank accounts and evict me from the home I had lived in since I was 5. "Don't look so shocked, Elena," Sarah had whispered to me in the parking lot that day, her eyes cold and devoid of the glow she showed the cameras. "In this world, the story belongs to whoever tells it first. And right now, the story is that you're a thief. If you try to fight this, I'll make sure you spend the rest of your life in a cage for the embezzlement I've already planted in your name." She thought she had won. She thought a broke dropout would just disappear into the shadows. But Sarah made one critical mistake. She forgot that I was the one who actually understood how the system worked. I didn't try to sue her immediately. I knew she had the clout and the lawyers to bury me. Instead, I disappeared into the janitor life. I took a job as a low-level clerk in the city's records office, scrubbing floors and filing documents for the very judges Sarah was trying to charm at her galas. For 2 years, I lived in a basement apartment, surviving on coffee and the burning need for justice. I used my access to the records to teach myself the art of digital forensic stenography, the ability to track every keystroke and every edit made to legal documents. While Sarah was busy rebranding herself as a self-made billionaire, I was building a ghost ledger of her crimes. I tracked the lawyer she had bribed, the notary she had threatened, and the exact timestamp when my father's real will was shredded and replaced with her medical shock version. I didn't just study the law. I became an essential part of it. I worked my way up from a clerk to the lead court stenographer for Judge Sterling, a man who shared our name but none of our blood, and who was known for his permanent foreclosure on corporate corruption. He didn't know who I was, and I kept it that way. I wore the mask of the invisible servant, the woman who sat in the corner of the courtroom recording the truth while the golden children of the city lied through their teeth. By the time Sarah announced her engagement to Julian, she had convinced the world that I was a ghost. She didn't realize that every time she bragged about her inheritance on social media, she was providing me with another piece of evidence for the surgical strike. I was preparing. She wanted a high-profile engagement to cement her status, but she had accidentally invited the one person who could turn her fairy tale into a permanent foreclosure of her freedom. The backstory wasn't about poverty. It was about the glow of patience. I wasn't just Sarah's loser sister. I was the silent witness who had been recording her confession in shorthand for 3 long years. And tonight, at the height of her arrogance, the janitor of justice was finally ready to submit the final transcript. The tension in the grand ballroom shifted from a social gala to a pressure cooker in the span of a single heartbeat. Sarah's face, which had been glowing with the triumph of my public humiliation, began to twitch as she stared at the giant screen displaying the empty, austere courtroom. The social mask she had worn so perfectly for 3 years wasn't just cracking. It was shattering under the weight of the medical shock that comes when a predator realizes they have become the prey. She looked at Julian, but her fiancé was already taking a step back, his eyes darting toward the exits as he realized the philanthropist he was about to marry was being summoned by a grand jury. "This is a prank," Sarah screamed, her voice losing its melodic quality and turning into a shrill, desperate rasp. "Elena, you pathetic loser. Did you pay some hackers to do this?" "Security, I said, get her out of here. Why are you just standing there?" She lunged toward me, her diamond-encrusted hand raised as if she intended to slap the glow of confidence right off my face. But the two security guards who had been holding my arms didn't move to help her. In fact, they didn't even flinch. They released their grip on my uniform and stepped into a formal, protective stance, not behind her, but behind me. That was the moment the mirror paradox hit the room like a physical blow. The head of security, a man named Miller who Sarah had hired to keep trash out of her party, reached into his jacket and pulled out a badge. "Ms. Sterling, we aren't hotel security," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a permanent foreclosure on her freedom. "We are state investigators attached to the district attorney's office, and we aren't here to escort your sister out. We are here to ensure that you don't leave this building until the emergency hearing is concluded." The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that sounded like a rushing wind. The surgical strike had bypassed her, expensive lawyers and her PR teams entirely. Sarah looked around the room, searching for a friendly face, but the elite guests who had been laughing at her jokes seconds ago were now filming the disaster on their phones. They weren't her friends. They were spectators at a car crash. "Julian, do something!" Sarah pleaded, grabbing her fiancé's arm so hard her knuckles turned white. "Your father is the most powerful lawyer in the state. Tell them they can't do this." Julian looked at his father, the elder Mr. Thorne, who was standing near the front of the stage. But Mr. Thorne wasn't looking at Sarah with pity. He was looking at me with a nod of professional respect. "I'm afraid it's too late for that." "Sarah," the elder Thorne said, his voice booming through the silent hall, "I've spent the last hour reviewing the digital files Elena sent over. The ghost ledger she built isn't just a collection of theories. It's a chronological map of every forgery you committed. My son might have been blinded by your charm, but I am not blinded by a thief." The janitor had finally revealed the dirt she had been collecting, and the room felt like it was shrinking around my sister. I stepped forward, the black staff uniform no longer looking like a badge of shame, but like a tactical disguise that had served its purpose. I tapped my tablet again, and the courtroom feed on the screen suddenly changed. It showed the interior of my father's old study, captured by a hidden security camera Sarah never knew existed. The footage showed her and the family attorney huddled over the original will, laughing as they fed it into a shredder and replaced it with the forgery. The silence that followed was a surgical strike to Sarah's soul. There was no way to explain this away. There was no bad habit of mine that could justify her crimes. She looked at the screen, then at the investigators, and finally at me. For a second, I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who was always jealous of the way our father trusted me with his secrets. But that girl was gone, replaced by a monster of her own making. "You think you've won?" Sarah hissed, her voice low and dangerous as she realized she had no cards left to play. "You're still nothing, Elena. You're a clerk. A nobody who sits in a corner and types. I have the money. I have the power." "You had the money, Sarah," I replied, my voice as cold as the justice I was about to deliver. "But the moment that warrant was signed, every asset tied to the sterling estate was frozen by a kill switch in the banking system. You can't even pay for the champagne these people are drinking. And as for the courtroom, we don't need to go to the courthouse. Judge Sterling is already on the line, and the venue has just been legally changed to right here." The ballroom doors were locked from the outside. The status flip was complete. The engagement party was over, and the trial of Sarah Sterling had officially begun. The shift was instantaneous and absolute, a status flip that left the room breathless. At my signal, the catering staff, who were actually undercover bailiffs, began moving the ornate floral arrangements, clearing a path toward the center of the stage. The grand engagement dais was stripped of its silk coverings, revealing a sturdy mahogany table that had been brought in under the guise of a gift. In the blink of an eye, the most expensive party of the year was dismantled, and in its place stood the cold, functional architecture of a makeshift tribunal. The mirror paradox was complete. Sarah was still in her engagement dress, but she was no longer a bride-to-be. She was a defendant standing before a surgical strike of legal accountability. "This is illegal! You can't turn a private residence into a courtroom!" Sarah screamed, her voice cracking as she watched Julian's father take a seat at the improvised bar. Under the Emergency Judicial Act, and given the flight risk you pose with Julian's private jet waiting at Teterboro, the court has granted a localized venue change, I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria. I walked toward the corner of the stage where a small, unassuming desk had been placed. I didn't sit in the witness chair. Instead, I sat at the stenography machine. I placed my fingers on the keys, the familiar glow of the digital interface lighting up my face. I am the lead court stenographer for this district. Sarah. Every word you say from this moment on is being recorded as sworn testimony. Anything you say will be used to ensure your permanent foreclosure. From the Sterling legacy, the medical shock that rippled through the audience was audible. The woman they had been mocking, as the help was now the one controlling the official record of the night. I wasn't just a witness. I was the guardian of the truth. Judge Sterling's face appeared on the massive screens, his gaze stern and unyielding. Ms. Elena Sterling has been working under my direct supervision for 18 months to facilitate this audit, the judge announced. She has provided the court with a ghost ledger that documents the systematic theft of her inheritance. Sarah Sterling, you are ordered to stand and remain silent until your counsel is present. Though I see Mr. Thorne Sr. has already declined to represent you. Sarah turned to Julian, her eyes wide with terror. Julian, tell them. Tell them you love me. Julian, however, was busy removing the diamond-encrusted watch Sarah had given him as an engagement gift. He looked at her with a mixture of pity and revulsion. My father warned me that your family's wealth felt like a house of cards. Sarah, I just didn't realize you were the one who had stolen the deck. He stepped off the stage, leaving her standing alone in the center of the spotlight. The social mask she had cultivated for 3 years was gone, leaving behind nothing but a woman whose glow had been revealed as nothing more than stolen light. I didn't feel the joy I thought I would. Instead, I felt a deep, cold sense of resolution as I began to type, my fingers flying across the keys. At a rate that fascinated the onlookers, the transcript appeared in real time on the monitors. Every lie Sarah had told to the investigators, every false claim she had made about my instability was being cross-referenced with the forensic data I had spent years collecting. The janitor was finally sweeping the room, and there was nowhere left for her to hide the dirt. The court will now hear the opening statement regarding the Sterling forgery. The judge's voice boomed. I looked up from my machine and met Sarah's eyes. She was shaking, her hands clutching the fabric of her $50,000 dress as if it could protect her from the surgical strike of the law. I didn't say a word. I just kept typing, the steady rhythm of the keys, sounding like the ticking of a clock, counting down to the end of her empire. The power flip was absolute. I was no longer the sister in the shadows. I was the architect of her reality. The atmosphere in the ballroom had grown heavy, the scent of expensive lilies now cloying and suffocating. As the legal climax reached its breaking point, I stood up from my stenography machine, my movements deliberate and precise, and walked toward the center of the stage. The surgical strike I had spent years planning was about to deliver its final, lethal blow. Sarah sat slumped in a gilded chair, her eyes wild as she watched me pull a vacuum-sealed evidence bag from my kit. Inside was a handful of thin, vertical paper strips, the remains of the original, that Sarah believed had been destroyed forever in our father's shredder. Sarah, you told the court that our father died with only one final wish to leave everything to you because I was unstable, I said, my voice echoing with a glow of absolute certainty. I held the bag up so the investigators and the cameras could see it clearly. But you made a fatal error. You used a strip-cut shredder, thinking that once the paper was in pieces, the truth was gone. You didn't realize that in the world of high-tech forensics, paper is like a puzzle that never truly loses its picture. The medical shock in the room was palpable as the giant screen changed again. It showed a high-resolution scan of the reassembled strips, a process called digital reconstruction that I had spent 6 months performing in secret. The ghost ledger was no longer just a digital theory. It was now a physical reality. As the image sharpened, the signature at the bottom of the document became clear. It wasn't Sarah's forged masterpiece. It was our father's distinctive, shaky handwriting, dated just 3 hours before he passed away. This document, I continued, pointing to the screen, not only reinstates my half of the inheritance, but it also contains a kill switch clause our father added at the very end. He knew you were capable of greed, Sarah. He wrote that if any attempt was made to alter his wishes, the offending party would be completely disinherited and the entirety of the Sterling estate would be placed into a charitable trust under my sole management. Sarah lunged forward, her face twisted in a mask of pure venom. That's a lie. I watched him sign the other one. He loved me more. He loved the person he thought you were, I countered, my voice hardening. But the law only cares about who you actually are. And thanks to the DNA recovery on these shredded strips, we found something else. We found traces of the skin cream you were wearing that night. Sarah, the lab report proves that your hands were the last ones to touch this document before it was fed into the machine. You didn't just find a new will. You personally destroyed the old one. The permanent foreclosure on her lies was final. The room fell into a silence so profound that you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. This was the moment of surgical precision I had lived for. Judge Sterling's voice returned, his tone like a falling gavel. Based on the forensic evidence presented by Elena Sterling, the court finds the will, currently held by the defendant, to be a fraudulent instrument. I am issuing an immediate order for the seizure of all assets under the name of Sarah Sterling, and I am referring this matter for immediate criminal prosecution of grand larceny and forgery. As the lead investigator stepped forward to officially read Sarah her rights, she looked around the room one last time. The glow of her elite life had been extinguished. The investors were already leaving, deleting her contact information as they walked. Julian was gone. Even the wait staff she had insulted were watching her with a quiet, justified satisfaction. The janitor had not just cleaned the room. I had rebuilt the house on a foundation of truth. I sat back down at my machine and typed the final words of the session. Defendant in custody. Case closed. The final resolution was not marked by a celebration, but by a profound, cleansing silence that settled over the ballroom. As the investigators led Sarah toward the service, elevator the same, exit she had tried to force me through. Only an hour prior, the social mask she had, worn for years, finally dissolved into a state of raw, unfiltered shock. She didn't scream or fight anymore. She simply stared at her feet, her $50,000 silk train dragging across the floor, collecting the very dust she had once looked down upon. The status flip was so total that even the air in the room seemed lighter, freed from the suffocating weight of her pretension. I walked out of the Pierre Hotel and stood on the sidewalk, watching the flashing blue lights of the police cruiser disappear into the midnight traffic of New York City. For the first time in 3 years, the ghost ledger in my mind was blank. The surgical strike had been successful, but the victory wasn't about the money or the penthouse she had stolen. It was about the glow of reclaiming the truth. I looked up at the sky and felt a quiet connection to my father, knowing that his real legacy was finally safe from the person who had tried to shred it. The next morning, I didn't return to the courthouse as a janitor or a clerk. I returned as the founder of the Sterling Integrity Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing forensic legal aid to those who have been defrauded by their own families. I took the millions Sarah had hoarded and turned them into a kill switch for other predators, ensuring that no one else would have to disappear into the shadows just to find justice. Sarah's permanent foreclosure from society was complete. She was sentenced to 7 years, a time she would spend far away from champagne galas and designer gowns. As for me, I kept my stenography machine in my new office as a reminder. It taught me that while some people use their voices to lie, the truth is written in the steady, quiet rhythm of the keys. The janitor had finished the sweep, and the light was finally back on.